for other people to get involved. The smallest commitments, right? Liking something on Facebook, though it can be mocked, is better than nothing. And trying to figure out if somebody likes something, like, okay, what's the next kind of form of commitment you can draw out of that, right? But I do think that for a lot of people, and especially young people, the sense that from where I stand and being involved is too high a climb is a deterrent that we've got to figure out how to level and bring down. Yes?
Can you talk about seizing power and understanding power in the context of youth unemployment? Because I feel that's something that not only brings us down and makes us feel powerless, but also seems like economic monopolies that are too hard to unpack at this point. So there seems to be like an impasse.
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me talk about that in the context of the minimum wage debate, right, which impacts young people disproportionately. I think we have, you've heard me kind of say in passing this kind of contrast between trickle-down economics and what I call middle-out economics, right? I think this is not just a matter of economics, it's a matter of worldview. There's a trickle-down worldview, and there's a middle-out worldview. There's some people who believe that not only that if you take care of through the tax code and public policy rich people, that somehow that preferential treatment will result in them creating more jobs for everybody else, or their prosperity kind of leaking down to everybody else in some way. There's that economic theory, but there's also a political theory that says when you give a few people at the top more voice and more power, that they will look out for the best interests of everybody and a common good will trickle down to the rest of us, right? I think one of the first things that we all have to do, but especially you have to do as young people, is challenge that trickle-down mindset, which is so internalized by so many people. I talk to people down in SeaTac, young people, down in SeaTac and Tukwila and Kent during the campaign for the $15 minimum wage there. And they were people who, by all rights, should have been like on board, super committed, voting for. But many of them were at best ambivalent, right? And they were ambivalent because some of them were unemployed or some of them were underemployed, and all of them who were working close to minimum wage, right? And they were living in this scarcity mindset, this trickle-down mindset that they had totally internalized. That, gosh, if we raise wages, if you raise the cost of something like employment, there ends up being less employment, right? That if wages go up, then jobs will disappear. And what I had to talk with them about was that, number one, you have to see that you've internalized this mindset, and number two, this mindset is wrong, right? And number three, there is an alternative mindset. The alternative mindset says, no. People like you who are young, who want to work, who sometimes are working at low-wage jobs, are not costs to be cut, right? You are customers to be cultivated. And if you have more money in your pocket, if you are earning more, if you're going from $9 an hour to 12 or $15 an hour, you're suddenly going to be buying more stuff everywhere, and you're going to become a job creator, right? The real job creators in this economy are not wealthy business people. The real job creators are poor and middle-class customers. And that's a mindset shift that just turns upside down the entire cosmology of how the economy works and where prosperity comes from, right? And so I think the first thing that we've got to do in general, but again, particularly as young people, is to, you can't beat something with nothing, right? And even though Democrats and progressives have long railed against trickle-down economics and laissez-faire and kind of that orthodoxy, we haven't been very effective at offering a compelling alternative. And by offering an alternative and saying there's a different way of thinking about this, that prosperity comes from us, that when we have jobs, when we have more money, when we are able to have purchasing power, everybody gets richer, everybody prospers more, right? And we've got to prime the pump that way by raising wages and raising employment for young people. That's a mindset thing and kind of a theory of action thing. The second point I would make about youth unemployment, though, is to connect it up with just the point of what you're doing here. Okay? Why are you here? You are here at university, you're here in college in part to become better educated citizens and human beings, and in part, made this investment to get skills that presumably will give you an opportunity to be contributors in the economy later on, right? And I think one of the things that is missing right now in our city and our state in the economic conversation is exactly what you're talking about, this kind of youth voice that says, hold on here. We have done as everybody has asked us to do. We have played by the rules. We've gotten our education. We've gotten skilled up, and we want to contribute now, right? And so we've got to start thinking more imaginatively about ways that young people can be literally put to work. It was a great Democrat. The last time we had economic trials that were even remotely as bad as we've got right now during the Depression, when FDR decided that facing an entire generation of unemployed and underemployed people, we're going to create a WPA. We're going to create a civilian conservation corps. We're going to create public works projects. We're going to do all these things that just get young people working and put some modest amount of money in some of their pockets, but just get them in the habit of working, right? Right now, the frame of what's possible in politics is so narrow and so fearful and so tiny that there aren't even good Democrats out there calling for a new WPA, right? That's the kind of thing that, if it's driven by young people, can become part of the conversation. You can, we together can expand the frame of the possible, right? And if you want proof of that, just look at the fact that we're talking about a $15 minimum wage, right? A year and a half ago, I'm involved with this thing called the Democracy Alliance, which is a national network of big dollar donors for democratic causes, right, progressive causes. And a year ago, I was at this meeting, and Nick and I were there, and we talked about the idea of a $15 minimum wage. And people in that room essentially laughed at us, right? They said, "You are nuts. Like, we're Democrats. We'd love to see that happen, but you guys are nuts. That is way too much. You'll get laughed out of the room." Right? And here we are today, right? With the city of SeaTac having enacted it, with this council member of the Seattle City Council having succeeded and gotten elected and ousted a longtime incumbent, essentially on that platform, with New Jersey raising its minimum wage, where people all around the country, where the United States Senate is now kind of debating, about to debate a hike in the minimum wage, like the frame of the possible has shifted, right? It may take us a while longer to actually get a national $15 minimum wage, but people are talking about stuff as possible that a year ago would have been laughed out of the room, right? I think that you all can lead a similar kind of transformation on things like new WPA, infrastructure bank, creating a new CCC. These kinds of things that will prime the pump and create opportunities for young people to work and to contribute, to get paid, but also to contribute to the country, right? Older guys like me, I will make that case. I have made that case. But the energy of people like you, in starting to push ideas like that, can really put it on the agenda.
Yeah, I think part of the narrowness of politics you're talking about earlier, of action, I personally feel like it's partially attributable to the partisanship currently we have in, especially in national politics. A couple weeks ago, you wrote a piece on CNN how President Obama should be dealing with the shutdown of the Republicans in Congress, and a lot of it's preferred appointments for vacancies on the appellate court also has been blocked. So I'm just wondering if you have any general commentary on the current state, like the red versus blue partnership.
Let me actually ask a question first of you or of anybody here. Do you all ever do anything with young Republicans on campus?
We try.
Yeah.
So tell me about what you all do. What kind of stuff?
Farmers.
Squash them in debates.
Squash them in debates. We'll have to do stuff with you where it involves us crushing you. Okay. That's good. What else?
We've done voter reg in the past.
Voter reg. Okay. Yeah. Do you have substantive conversations about just the question that you've asked? So, I think I asked that question not like to play gotcha. I actually asked that question in earnest, and maybe to kick up an idea here, which I'll return to in a second. My direct response to the question is, we are in a period of polarization, not seen since just before the Civil War. Right? That's not rhetorical hyperbole. That's actually fact. right? And it's really been dramatically accelerated just in this, these last 30 plus years. And this is the third time you've heard me talk about the last 30, 40 years, right? I mean, we had an era here that we can pin on at the start of Reagan, but in candor, it began with late Carter, where a lot of these trends began to unfold in this country. And right now we have this polarization, though, that Norm Ornstein, this political scientist in DC, has described as asymmetric polarization, right? So it's not just that the parties are far apart, but it's that one party, the Republicans, have gone off the deep end, right? That, yeah, Democrats are a little bit more to the left than they used to be, but Republicans are miles more to the right than they used to be, right? And as a result of that, a few things have happened. Number one, the quote-unquote center, right, has shifted rightward. That's why when Barack Obama enacts the Heritage Foundation's plan for healthcare reform that was enacted by Republican Governor Mitt Romney in Massachusetts, it is called socialism today, right? Because that center has drifted over to the right, right? So this asymmetric polarization makes it really hard to reckon with, the question of how do we solve this, how do we deal with this, right? And there are some Republicans who will admit this fact, and who recognize that it's not just the Tea Party in the last 2-3 years, but Republicans in general in the last 30 years have just kept on going farther and farther out, and it's become harder to be a moderate, centrist Republican. But one of the things that doesn't happen anymore, and the reason why I asked that question, is actually getting cross-partisan, bipartisan conversations about what we can do together to address this polarization, right? And to do that in a way that isn't just about, hey, UW young Republicans, let's have a meeting together where we can talk about how all you guys have gone off the deep end, right? how we're going to fix that, right? But it's got to be a conversation that starts with facts, which is polarization has been asymmetric, but also starts with, but also goes from there to say, we're not here just blame it on you. We're not here just to therefore wash our hands of it. We're here to say, for the love of the game, it would be a better thing if we could figure out how to keep things from getting further polarized and more extreme. Are there ways where we can find a common way to talk to each other? Common values, if not actually common ground in policy, right? And it does begin with certain habits of civility. Actually, I'm all for the great fun debates where you squash them, right? That's part of the game too, right? Just like as a baseball fan, I'm a Yankee fan. I am all for when the Yankees beat the Red Sox, right? But when the Red Sox win the World Series, as they just did, I can tip my hat because the way they won the World Series was good for the game. They pulled together a hodgepodge roster of cast-offs and castaways and people who were, and they cohered as a team, and they played the game right, and they won the World Series. That's good for the game, right? As a Yankee fan, what I want to do isn't just figure out ways to crush the Red Sox. I want to figure out how can my team and other teams learn from the smart way that they play the game, right? And I think there are conversations to be had between Republicans and Democrats, at least on campus, right? It's much easier here than it is out in the wider world to engage each other that way. This brings me to the idea that I have, and I'll see if you guys are up for this. I want to amend my invitation to you all to come to Citizen University. What I would like to suggest is that you all come to Citizen University, our conference in March, and for every one of you who comes, you bring a young Republican. I'm serious. Which will require you in the first place between now and March to know a young Republican well enough where you could plausibly say, let's go to this thing together, right? Let's go to this thing together. We're going to hear from speakers. We go on workshops, and frankly, the workshops and the speakers are more left of center, and so they will probably have more heartburn than you will. But last year at the conference, we brought together a woman named Joan Blades, who is one of the co-founders of MoveOn.org. So a Democrat and progressive in good standing, right? Along with a guy named Mark Meckler, who was co-founder of the Tea Party Patriots, right? And we had them talking, and they together have been doing this project around the country called Living Room Conversations. You guys can go on the web. They've got a template now on the web for Living Room Conversations where they've created kind of a framework and a script for how you can invite a couple of buddies who think like you do, and have somebody who invites a couple of buddies the way that they think and see the world, and meet in your living room over coffee and dessert or whatever, right? Have a structured conversation about values and issues, right? And the hope and the goal isn't that everybody comes out singing Kumbaya and loving each other and agreeing with each other. The aim is simply, number one, to humanize rather than demonize, right? Really, actually, you spend some time getting to talk to people about where you're from and what your deal is, and you know that makes a difference. Relationships matter, right? But the second is that you begin to find some areas where, if there isn't necessarily policy agreement, at least there might be unlikely points of convergence. So, for instance, out of Living Room Conversations, it's become clear that people like Joan Blades and people like Mark Meckler happen to agree that reform of our criminal justice system is imperative, right? People from the left, like Joan, want to reform the prison industrial complex out of social justice reasons. People from the